Mr. Sujan Chenoid, the chairman of T20, Mr. Sachin Chaturvedi, Mr. Sameer Saran, who's been a very big driver behind this, my distinguished colleague Inam Gambhir, all our colleagues from different parts of the world who've been a very integral component of the T20, Think 20 India process. Ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, let me first compliment T20 for the excellent work that it has done, for the fact that it has been an ideas bank, for the fact that it has been acted like an intellectual think tank of the G20, for the fact that it has taken G20 out to a vast range of meetings across India, and to the fact that it has involved leading thinkers and intellectuals from across the world, not merely from T20 countries, but also from several other countries in the process of laying down a very clear Think 20 India communique. Ladies and gentlemen, I wanted to personally both congratulate and thank Sujan, Sameer, Sachin and their teams for all the hard work that they've put in. It's been an incredible amount of hard work. And let me, on behalf of the G20 Secretariat, greatly appreciate the work that they've done. Ladies and gentlemen, we're passing through very, very challenging times. And these are challenging times because of a vast range of if you look around the world, there's a global slowdown, there is inflation, there is a global debt crisis, there is a impact of the post-COVID era, there is a huge implication on the implementation of the sustainable development goals, and on top of which there is a geopolitical crisis which is going on for a long time. But irrespective of all this, India all along felt, as our Prime Minister said, that India's G20 must be very decisive, it must be very inclusive, it must be very ambitious, it must be very action-oriented. So we've attempted to make it very, very action-oriented all through. And as you would have seen in many of our outcome documents, we've had almost 9 ministerial meetings. We've had a large number of engagement meetings. All the communiques that have come out, we've tried to draft out an outcome document, a clear outcome document reflecting our ambition, where we should not just get bogged down by a crisis in Europe, which is a geopolitical crisis, which is not in our hand right now. And therefore, we should move on with many other challenges which the world faces. And that is what we've attempted to do. So, ladies and gentlemen, there is a big movement forward in G20. We've tried to push the envelope. We've tried to push the ambition. We've tried to push inclusiveness. We've tried to push decisiveness in a very, very big way during the course of India's G20 presidency. And this acting as a catalyst to provide greater impetus was necessary simply because if you look around the world today, and if you look at the latest forecast by IMF, it says that 80% of the growth is actually going to come from developing countries and emerging markets. And it goes on to say that 2/3 of the growth in the next coming decade is going to come from emerging markets and developing countries. And therefore, the challenge is really that if growth is going to come from emerging markets, and if you look at G20 itself, from the time that it was constituted in 2008 till now, the share of emerging markets is going up, the share of developing world is coming down. And if the share of emerging markets is going up, you need a financial architecture which is designed to take care of emerging markets. And you need a financial architecture to ensure that SDG goals and the climate action is met by both the developed world and the developing world. But the developing world needs to be better prepared for that. And because for the first time in the history of G20, you have 4 emerging markets: Indonesia, India, Brazil, South Africa, one after another hosting the G20. This opportunity will never come again. This opportunity will never come again, because all along, in the G20 or whichever confederation we look around the world, we've reacted to an agenda set by others. But this is the first time that emerging countries have got an opportunity to set a development agenda which can really define their future. And therefore, it is critical, it is very, very critical that we ensure that these 4 presidencies give it an opportunity in the best possible manner to ensure that there is greater flow of resources for the emerging markets to be able to face the challenge of sustainable development goals and of climate change. For decades, it was said that the growth is slow because emerging markets are growing slowly. It's just the reverse is actually happening now. Just the reverse. It's the emerging markets which are growing at higher rates, and the developing markets are growing at slower rates. But if you look at the financial architecture, then you find that actually resources are flowing from emerging markets to the developed world and not vice versa. And therefore, both the global financial architecture and the financial flows and the exchange rates have all been unfavorable to emerging markets. And what we've attempted to do while doing this is that in the post-COVID era, we've seen vast segments of population going below poverty line. We've seen huge segments losing their jobs. But in the midst of all this, one thing becomes absolutely clear. And that is that the global financial architecture needs to be altered, it needs to be reformed, it needs to be restructured, it needs to be redesigned to meet this new era where emerging markets will lift vast segments of people above poverty line. And this is happening because if you look at the world, the demographics favor the emerging markets. There's an aging population in the developed part of the world. There's a completely young demographics in the emerging and the developing part of the world, and with very low dependency burdens. And therefore, you need this completely new architecture to take place. The other big change that is taking place, big change, if you look at the world today, is the fact that during this COVID period, digital transformation took place in a very big way. The emergence of digital public infrastructure as a means to reach out to people who were impacted. And in India itself, we saw that we were able to provide 800 million people resources straight into their bank accounts instead of putting out vast financial packages. Today, we put out 600 schemes of the government. We make resources reach the beneficiaries straight into their bank accounts. So what the world has seen is the emergence of digital public infrastructure, which is open source, which is open API, which is interoperable, and which is able to provide benefit to the citizens in a far more effective manner than what has happened in the past. Most innovation that has happened in the world in the last 2 decades have happened due to big tech in the American part and the European part of the world. That is Amazon, that is Apple, that is Google, that is Facebook, now Meta. And in China, it's happened because of Tencent and Alibaba. But it has led to digital data being utilized to do more and more of machine learning and AI. Your data, my data, everybody's data. What the digital public infrastructure has done is to ensure a techno-economic solution to the challenge where the data is owned by the citizen, but it has allowed in public interest layers to be built, open source layer to be built on top of which private sector has innovated. So a huge number of private sector innovate, compete because it's an interoperable model. And therefore, identity, bank accounts, fast payments, and that's why Estonia, Brazil, India have all demonstrated that you can do technological leap, you can do pole vaulting today in a manner which the world had never seen before. And therefore, technology has to be at the heart of this quantum pole vaulting that will enable us to leap forward. The other big change, which is critical and which is important, is the fact that we need long-term resources. And long-term are resources because both SDG and climate changes are both two sides of the same coin. A country which is going to be poor will be most impacted by climate change, and a country which is impacted by climate change will see vast segments of its population go below poverty line. And therefore, they're both two sides of the same coin, and therefore you need long-term resources to flow in. There are several estimates around this. The International Energy Authority, IEA, said that you need about 4.5 trillion for energy. The UN SDGs come out with a 500 billion package. But broadly, to my mind, you need about, including the resources required by developed part of the world, advanced economies, you need roughly about 7 trillion per annum. Estimates, N.K. Singh and Larry Summers' report says 3 billion. It says, some say 3.5, but broadly, if you take the world's estimate, my analysis after reading all different reports is that you'd require broadly about 6.5 to 7 trillion, including for the developed world, for SDGs and climate action. Now, people, if you talk to macroeconomists, they'll tell you resources. That's a lot of resources. It's difficult to find so much resources. Let me first of all say that when you move towards a completely new economy for climate action and climate change, you are creating completely new opportunities, new job opportunities. And there are several estimates which say that actually in the next 5 to 6 years, you'll be creating an economy worth about 100 billion for a completely new world of tomorrow, which will be a world of completely green hydrogen, biofuels, renewables, etc. So 100 billion new opportunity you are creating. But let me also say that the world is not short of resources. The world today, investable assets worth about $350 trillion are available. $350 trillion, that's the size and scale. Against a requirement of about 7 trillion, you have $350 trillion available. Private investment funds, pension funds, all they themselves have close to about 150 trillion. 150 trillion. The challenge is that against a requirement of about 6.5 trillion to 7 trillion, you have 350 trillion. You are creating an opportunity of about 100 trillion. And you need resources to flow into those markets. You need to de-risk these countries. The challenge is that developed world gets resources at 2%, India gets it, some countries get it at about 8%, Africa gets it at 16%, Sub-Sahara gets it at 22%, which makes projects non-doable. So the lending has to be done not on the balance sheet of the World Bank, but on the balance sheet of the world. And that will enable you then to do much greater lending, because on the present balance sheet of the World Bank, it is not possible to do this. You need completely new instruments of blended finance, of credit enhancement, of first loss guarantees, many other new instruments which will come in to enable private sectors to mobilize. And that is really the key. The key is, how do you enable private sector resources to flow in to create the new world of tomorrow for both SDG and climate action? But this, to my mind, would require a very different approach, which is not just a government approach. The developed part of the world in 2008 in Copenhagen had committed to $100 billion, which it had not lived up to. But even if it lives up to $100 billion and beyond 2005 onwards, my view on this 2025 onwards, my view is that you need a very different approach, and that is a market-based approach. You need market-based resources to flow in. And that really means that to my mind, means it's important to understand that 1% of the companies today account for 40% of the greenhouse gas emission. 1% of the companies listed on stock exchange account for 40% of greenhouse gas emission. But today, stock exchanges, there's no data which is transparently put. Data is not machine readable. Stock exchanges are not able to have a standardized formats, and there is no Moody's in the world of climate exchange which will tell you that this one is doing so much of pollution. And therefore, you need a world where you are able to pin these companies down in terms of data, in terms of their ranking, in terms of credit enhancement, in terms of their credit rating, and tell them that they are responsible for it. And once the world is able to put down and say that this company is polluting the world to this extent, and put it out, stock markets will penalize these companies. You will see resources not going in, because the world is going to put resources into companies which are going green, which are going digital, and the countries are going to become rich and prosperous, those which are growing green and growing digital. And therefore, my belief is that we need to really think of a market approach which penalizes those who really put out greenhouse gas emissions in the world. And that's something which is important. And these are some of the key things which are important. And we in India have tried to push a lot of renewable. We've done about close to 175 gigawatts. We believe that India must be the first country, though we are not responsible for polluting and carbonizing the world. We account for just about 1.3% of the total carbon space, which is, out of the total carbon space available, we've occupied just 1.3%. Logically, we should be entitled to 17.5% based on our per capita population. But irrespective of that, India must be the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing. And India must take the lead in this. That's what our Prime Minister said through his Panch Amrit at Glasgow, which he spelled out. We put out very ambitious goals, including a greenhouse gas emission, because we believe that it's not just electricity, which is renewable, but it's a whole range of hard-to-abate sectors like refineries, steel, cement. If Europe is going to put border taxes in 2026, all of us have to go green to ensure that we meet those deadlines. And countries and capitals will actually give you incentives to push for that. So India will do it. But we need other countries also to do it. We need everybody else to do it, because climate change is a challenge for the world. The world may survive, but we as human beings will go extinct. And therefore, we need to do this. We need to do this for our own sake. And therefore, my challenge is that resources, our view is very strongly that resources must flow in to the emerging markets. Resources must flow in to handhold them. Resources must flow in because there are young demographics. Resources must flow in because these are countries which are going to account for 80% of the GDP in the coming years. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure working with T20. We've done an enormous amount of work in a vast range of areas, including accelerating growth, including pushing for SDG, including climate action, digital transformation. But one of the key things we've really during our presidency pushed the envelope is on multilateral institutions for the 21st century, because we believe that these are institutions which were created in the post-World War era. They were created at a time when there was no crisis of climate action, there was no crisis of sustainable development goals, and therefore they need to be completely redesigned for a new era of today. And secondly, we strongly believe, like our Prime Minister put out, that women-led development, gender equality will have to be a very key driver of India's G20 presidency. So our focus has been very, very strongly on gender equality and women. And we focus very strongly on that across a whole range of areas, including learning outcomes, health outcomes, nutrition, and bridging the digital divide. The World Economic Survey Forum, their study says that it will take 132 years to achieve gender parity. None of us have 132 years. We need to do it in a decade. And to do that, G20 has to take the lead. And therefore, India's presidency has pushed for it in a very big way. And our belief is that with all these key priorities, we pushed for action, we pushed for all the key issues which are confronting and challenging the world of today. Geopolitics is important, but there are many other important issues which are challenging citizens of the world. Geopolitics is important for one part of the world, but issues of SDG, climate action, gender equality concerns the entire world. And these are issues which must be brought into the forefront, which India's presidency has done vigorously with energy and dynamism. And I'm truly delighted that Think20 has brought out such a vibrant, energetic, and lively communique. My good wishes and my congratulations. Thank you very much.
As Shubh mentioned, he has launched some of India's most iconic programs, from the Aspirational district program where you saw transformation at the grassroots, to God's own country in Kerala and Incredible India, and now certainly the G20. Mr. Kant, going ahead, as we move towards the Brazilian presidency, in the last 1 year, how has the politics of Europe in many ways played out in the ambitions of the world on some of the areas you mentioned? You mentioned climate and SDGs being a global project. Are we seeing sufficient interest to tackle these? Or are we seeing some sort of an impasse where unless you solve one issue, you're not going to make headway on the others?
So, Samir, in reality, the G20 comprises of the G7. It also comprises of Russia, China, and the emerging markets. And this is one forum where emerging markets have a voice. And as I said, it's an important, the Russia-Ukraine crisis is an important issue for one part of the world. It's G20 is an economic forum. It's a forum for financial growth, for economic growth. It's not a forum for global politics. But in Bali, it was strongly felt that the present geopolitics is having a huge impact on food, fuel, fertilizer. It's having an impact on the economy of Europe. And therefore, this is a critical issue. But the G20 did not express its own view. In para 3, it fell back on the UN resolution because that's the right political forum. So it went back to the UN resolution and quoted parts of the UN resolution. And in para 4, it laid down certain principles which it spelled out for international peace and security, etc. And that this is not an era of war, this is an age of diplomacy and dialogue, what a prime minister had said. So we had fallen back on the United Nations, what it had said. My view is that we've had a protracted conflict on for about 1.5 years. This is not the only issue. There are developmental issues which must come right in the forefront. Issues which are issues of conflict must take go back a little bit. I think issues of impact on livelihoods, on sustainability, on the sustainable development goals, on many other challenges which are impacting the world are very, very critical. They must come center stage.
Mr. Kant, as we are 5 weeks away from the summit, 5.5 weeks before the leaders come to town, come to Delhi, what excites you about the last 8 months and what is keeping you up at night?
So we've done a lot of hard work. I would like to compliment my team on this. The entire team, we've done a lot of hard negotiations. If you look at energy, if you look at climate, these are complex issues. I mean, these are very, very complex issues in today's world. And that's why the negotiations were very, very tough. They were not easy. They were very, if you look at, for instance, the communique emerging out of the climate working group Environment Working Group. It's a complex area to deal with because different countries are at different stages of growth. They have different national interests. They have to take care of their own growth. We have to be concerned about them because rightly so many emerging markets are saying this, that we have not fossilized the world. And those concerns need to be taken. What is known as the common differentiated responsibility. And therefore, a lot of hard work has been done, and now we are getting into the final round of, we've drafted out the leaders' declaration. We've circulated it. We got one round of inputs. We've circulated it again. We've got the second round. We are getting into hard negotiations starting from tomorrow, and that's why I'm going back at 4 a.m. in the morning, so that we do virtual negotiations and we are able to drive everything down to the well in time for this New Delhi Leaders Declaration. One or couple of issues will be left, which we'll handle. A couple of issues which are left, we'll handle them physically when the Sherpas meet from 3rd onwards. But the leaders are they're all forward-looking, progressive, so they all want action. Let me tell you this, India's Prime Minister is very clear that our presidency must be full of action. And he's laid down the priorities personally. So the Prime Minister's priorities are very, very ambitious and inclusive, and we are pushing for them.
Mr. Kant, you have seen movements emerge in the past years through your service. How strong has the G20 message in your own estimation been? I mean, we came here to Mysore, and you have the state government all excited, you have people excited, you have folks coming to restaurant because they're eating at the T20 location. How much of India has been really mobilized to become part of this effort? How do you rate that effort that has really undertaken, which we have all undertaken in the last 8 to 9 months?
So, Samir, firstly, I think this is G20 is one occasion where foreign policy and diplomacy has been taken to the grassroots, to the people of India, and very, very successfully. I mean, this G20 has enabled everybody to understand what's G20, what the challenges of foreign policy and diplomacy are, what are the complexities which the world is facing. You can go and ask any school children, any school kid. He'll tell you, any college kid, because we've done a whole range of model G20s across schools and colleges. So we've enabled foreign policy, diplomacy, the complexities of it, which were very, very alien for most Indians, to reach to the common man. This is number one. Number two, unlike other countries which do it in one city or two cities, we didn't do this. The Prime Minister said it must go out to all the states of India, and it must go to about 60 cities of India. So we use that opportunity to improve the infrastructure in every city, improve drainage, sewage, solid waste, every little thing. And we've allowed the states have used that opportunity to promote their brands, to promote their culture, to promote their one district, one product, their local handicrafts, handloom. So it's been a huge effort and it's worked in very close coordination between the states and the center. And thirdly, I really think, where G20 is different from a World Cup cricket or a World Cup football in Qatar is that they are held for 12 days or 14 days. The G20 is for a year, and it's spread across the country. So you really get an opportunity to redefine your country. And it's enabled states to build their brands across the world. And the third key thing, I think, is that India has been able to play a key role in defining through its priorities what should be the world's priorities, which is very, very important. The developmental priorities have been brought center stage. The emerging market priorities have been brought center stage. The concerns of the developed world has been brought center stage. India has acted as the voice of the global south. We started our presidency with a meeting of the Voice of the Global South. So we brought their concerns of the developed world center stage, which nobody had ever done before. And lastly, the Prime Minister has pushed for Africa being a very key member of the G20, which has been, the Prime Minister wrote to all the G20 leaders, and we've got an overwhelming response from that. So this will make G20 far more representative.
So any sneak peek into some really great idea that we might be or we should be looking for? I mean, don't do that. Don't say that.
No sneak peek. But all that I can say is what the Prime Minister has said, that in India's presidency and its, we'll all attempt to be very inclusive, be very decisive, be very ambitious, and be very action-oriented. That's what our aim is, and we will be that. And we'll act as the voice of the Global South.
No, I think that's a great note to. Actually, someone sent me a WhatsApp message and they said, "Can you tell us the secret of his diet? Like, what do you eat? Like the energy levels and the excitement you bring into the." Someone just sent me a WhatsApp. Can you ask him this question? I won't. Okay. So sorry, I'm not asking him that question, but I'm just saying that people want to know that. But please ask him that over dinner. But sir, this is let me thank you for your leadership through the T20 process. You were always available at the end of a call. 6 a.m. in the morning, midnight, when we needed counsel, you were there. So all of us in this room, 200 of us who are gathered here, many who have contributed. I was just mentioning before you entered the room that over 1,000 authors have produced 310 policy briefs, 302 policy briefs, with 45% of them being women authors. And it's been a massive intellectual exercise from close to 700 institutions around the world who participated in this. And it would be fair to say that the assurance of you having our back was absolutely vital. And for that, we are all grateful. Please join me in applauding Mr. Kant for his leadership. But Mr. Kant, before you have the final say, you started your speech with that impassioned description of the world, a world that was upside down. And for that, we are going to present to you a book written by our comrade in the T20 process, Ambassador Susan Chenoy. He has written a book, The World Upside Down. And we thought that along with the G20 medallion, we should also present you that book.
So, before I take that book, I wanted to just take this opportunity because the kind of hard work and the intellectual brilliance and the real sparkle to G20 has been brought by T20. So it's brought in a huge amount of energy, vitality, dynamism to the G20 movement. And I really want to place on record our deep appreciation of the huge effort which T20 has put in with a large number of meetings, huge number of papers. I want to compliment its chairman, Sujan, and you and Sachin. I mean, you people have been just absolutely awesome and brilliant. So really, out of all the engagement groups, T20 has been par excellence, let me tell you this. Also, I wanted to say that my colleagues, and Muktesh and Inam and all, many of my colleagues are here. They've also put in a lot of hard work. So I want to place on record my appreciation of their hard work.
So I'm going to now request Ambassador Sujan Chenoy to present his book first. It's fresh off the press, already #1 on Amazon. So it's scorching the market. So congratulations, Ambassador Chenoy. Shubh, can you please bring us the T20 G20 medallion? This is the T20 medallion, which has the G20 on one.